Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am sure all of you who joined us yesterday found the information very exciting and very informative. The speakers were just absolutely outstanding. I'm sure you're going to experience the same thing today. We have a great lineup of speakers and moderators to share a lot of information with you today. So I'm excited. Woke up last night, so I can't wait until tomorrow morning. Because the feedback we got from the conference attendees yesterday was just excellent, and we're satisfied with your responses. I just also want to remind you again that we want you to complete the survey that you will receive, because we always use that information to prepare for the following year. So we can tweak things, add things to make the conference even better than it is now. Now, I would like to introduce to you Miss Brianna Alexander of Alley Financial, one of our platinum sponsors for this conference, who will introduce our keynote speakers today. We have a keynote this morning, keynote conversation with Ray Bashar and Rodney Brooks. So we'll bring up Miss Brianna Alexander now.
Looks like someone have a sweet tooth.
Here you go, buddy. Thank you.
Of the Cartesian plane.
Good job. Yes.
You may kiss the bride.
Is about communication.
I love you very much.
Sign option 3.
Love you, Mom.
Love you, Dad.
Oh my God. It's our baby girl.
Good morning. My name is Brianna Alexander, and I manage corporate citizenship and employee philanthropy at Ally Financial. We support economic mobility with a focus on workforce preparedness, affordable housing, and financial education. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers for today's keynote conversation: racial, gender, generational, educational, and wealth gaps, economic disparities in America. First, I'll introduce Ray Bashara. Ray Bashara is a senior advisor for the Institute for Economic Equity at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, where he focuses on building savings and wealth inclusively. Raised in Akron, Ohio, Bashara is a graduate of The Ohio State University, Yale Divinity School, and the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. He is also a senior in the Fellow Security Program at the Aspen Institute. Most recently, he led and co-edited the book, The Future of Building Wealth: Brief Essays on the Best Ideas to Build Wealth for Everyone, published in fall 2021 in partnership with the Aspen Institute. Bashara is widely credited with leading the campaign to enact Assets for Independence Act, which created thousands of individual development accounts throughout the U.S. He also forged baby bonds, Roths at birth, child savings accounts, and other measures in the U.S. Congress to establish savings accounts at birth for all kids. Over the past 25 years, he has advised presidential candidates as well as several administrations. Bashara has written for the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Atlantic, and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and has appeared on CBS Morning, NPR, Bloomberg, and CNBC, among others. His first book, The Next Progressive Era, co-authored with Philip Longman, was published in 2009. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Bashara. Next up, we have Rodney A. Brooks. Rodney A. Brooks writes about retirement and issues related to economic and health disparities. A native of Linden, New Jersey, he received a BS in Communication Arts from Cornell University and an executive certificate in financial planning from Georgetown University. His retirement columns appear on U.S. News U.S. News and World Report, and SeniorPlanet.com. And he's a contributing writer at National Geographic and ESPN's The Undefeated. He has also written columns for the Washington Post and USA Today. Brooks' third book, Fixing the Racial Wealth Gap, Racism and Discrimination Put Us Here, but This is How We Can Save Future Generations, was released in October 2021. He is co-author of Retirement Planning Essentials, a guide to living well without running out of money, and author of the book, the ebook, Is $1 Million Enough? A Guide to Planning for and Living Through a Successful Retirement. He has testified before the U.S. Senate Special Committee on Aging on challenges facing Black Americans in retirement. He has also written extensively about the impact of COVID-19 on the Black community for National Geographic and financial literacy for ESPN's The Undefeated. Brooks was elected to the National Association of Black Journalists Hall of Fame in 2021. He was also a recipient of NABJ's President's Award. He serves on the Foolproof Foundation's Walter Cronkite Committee, an organization dedicated to teaching financial literacy in public schools. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Brooks.
Good morning, Ray and Rodney.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Great friends. That's great. I'm happy that you're joining us today. This is a great subject to talk about, and you are the persons that I want to talk to about it because you have great experience, a lot of knowledge in this space, and a commitment to addressing the issues that we're going to talk about today. Now, Ray, why should we be concerned about the wealth gaps as distinct to income gaps? Does income inequality has anything to do with it?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Ted. Great to be with you again. And yes, income matters. Your wages, your income, all those things, of course, matter. But the wealth gap matters, we think, more and in different ways. Wealth is like a barometer of progress. It reflects what's happened in the past, what you can do right now, and what you can do in the future. It's really our best overall barometer of whether or not we're making progress, say, for example, on the racial wealth gap or the generational wealth gap. So it's a critical barometer of progress. It's really, let me put it this way. If you get wealth right, that means you're getting a lot of other things right, like
That's
education and home ownership.
That's right. You're right about that. You're right about that. Now, Rodney, when you let's talk about the history, of this wealth gap, of the wealth gap. Just tell me a little bit more about that. When we talk about Black Americans, where they are socially and economically and financially, just share with me your thoughts about the history.
See, I think you can't talk about the wealth gap without talking about the history of racism and discrimination in the United States. And I'm talking about federal, state, even local governments were complicit in this. And so you can look at, there's been a lot of talk about Tulsa, with the Black Lives Matters, but that doesn't really get into how many cities there were white mobs who destroyed Black wealth and Black lives. In addition to Tulsa, I mean, I did a story for a magazine, and I wrote Tulsa and dozens of other cities had race riots, and the editor was like, "Did you really mean dozens?" Well, it could be hundreds, but every major city had these kind of disturbances that robbed Black people of their wealth and property. And then you had things like after World War II, the Veterans Bill, basically the people in Congress pushed the benefits, basically the administration of the benefits down to the state level, where these racist state officials did everything they could to deny Black veterans benefits, even after fighting in World War II. And then you could look at Levittown, Pennsylvania, which was a housing development that was built to help veterans, gain housing wealth. And they actually, Black American veterans were not allowed to even live there or buy homes there. And then the last thing I want to bring up quickly, I mean, there's many, I could talk a lot about this, but also look at the black farmers and how long it took them to basically make their case that the USDA was being racist when it came to the administration of loans. So there's so many instances over the years of Black Americans being robbed of their wealth, and then prevented from building wealth.
That's good. Thank you very much. Now, Ray, you noted there's something very disturbing to me and surprising about each of the wealth gaps. And you document this and the racial, the generational, the educational, gender gaps that exist. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, very, very briefly, and then I'll say a little bit more about the racial wealth gap. I want to build on the very good points that Rodney made. So, so we've studied these four gaps. Let me start with the generational wealth gap. So for the first time in history, younger generations are not going to do as well as their parents did at the same age. That's very troubling, right? All kinds of reasons for that. Then we had the educational wealth gap, which only people who have college degrees and above have actually built wealth over the last generation, and everybody else has seen their share of wealth decline. All right. The gender wealth gap, women have about 55 cents on the dollar to men. And that, like the racial wealth gap, has historical origins, women not being allowed to own property or to vote. And whatever other progress we've made on that is not translating into more wealth. And then there's the racial wealth gap, which I think so many surprising and disturbing things about that. One of them being that it fluctuates a little bit, mostly because things at the top fluctuate, because Black wealth hasn't really grown much in the last generation. And what's disturbing about that is that that's despite other progress. So educational gains, political representation, the end of legal discrimination, there's a whole range of things that are not translating into more wealth. And I think that goes back to what Rodney was saying. There's a history there. And so when you deny families over generations the ability to accumulate wealth, that just resides in that 8-to-1 wealth gap that we're seeing. And just to add a final point, things like college, which we think should narrow the gap, are actually making the racial wealth gap wider. So that's an example of progress that's not translating into more wealth, is education.
Well, why isn't college education not the equalizer? What is happening?
Well,
Is it the fact that they have the knowledge associated with that particular field of study, but not the financial knowledge to maximize the income generated from the degrees? Or
yeah.
are they just subject to structural discrimination or systemic discrimination where they are not able to rise in corporate America
Yeah.
and the government to
Well,
a higher level?
so let me be very clear. If you have a college degree, you have more wealth than if you don't. However,
Hmm.
the problem is at higher and higher levels of education, the gap gets bigger and bigger. So the largest gap is between blacks and whites with graduate or professional degrees.
Hmm.
Okay, so so whites are getting much higher returns on the same investment in education that blacks are, and part of that has to do with the fact that too many of them don't arrive in college with the skills to get onto a STEM track. Okay. Another is that college educated blacks are far more likely to be homeowners, and homeownership over the last 25 years has not been a good investment for many blacks. So that means that they're less likely. And then there's something called, and then student loans play a huge role in decreasing the wealth of college educated blacks. And then finally, there's something kind of a norm or an ethic where if black families are successful, there's a much greater expectation to share that wealth throughout their family. And that actually impacts the racial wealth gap.
Hmm. Oh, I see. Yes, I see. Now, when you talk about baby boomers, and when they retire, Rodney, what's happening there? Some have different stresses because wealth has not been created over their lifetime. Share your thoughts in returns to baby boomers and how they should deal with the wealth gap.
Okay. Well, one thing is when it comes to saving for retirement, um, Black Americans save at a much lower rate than white Americans for retirement accounts. That means so when it comes to actually retiring, the money is not there, and there are a bunch of reasons for that. Some of them we've already talked about. But if you don't, you know, for one thing. Now, if you work part time, you aren't able to contribute to a 401k, and then especially Black women are in and out of the job market for taking care of spouses, parents. Um, and so they're not then they're not only are they not contributing to their retirement plans, but they're also not contributing as much to Social Security. And then I'm going to talk more, a little bit more about Social Security because um, like 20 well probably 30 something percent of elder Black Americans on Social Security depend on Social Security for 90% of their income.
Hmm.
Okay. And so and then on top of that, um, and it all sounds really grim, but on top of that, Black Americans have more health issues than white Americans. So as you get older, you're dealing with one, you don't have the income, and two, you're in failing health. So you don't have the money for the health care that you really need to survive.
Mhm. Yeah, but I'm glad you brought that up because that's I always think about you need to take the long view of life rather than short view of life because you're going to get older, you're going to have these health issues, so you have to plan for those things, including your diet in terms of how you um, what you eat, and how you manage money. I said two things to keep you alive, managing money well and managing your health well,
That's right.
because they both will drive things. So now I always get upset, and someone raised this question yesterday at the conference, about home ownership. When we see that only 44% of African Americans own a home, even with Latino community rising a little higher than we are in terms of home ownership, um, and we know that homeownership is a way to acquire wealth. It doesn't go as high as a white household, but what can we do to spur greater homeownership among Black Americans? Do we need to talk about how we use the resources that we have? Because we know we spent about $1 trillion on consumer items and personal use items. So we think the money is there. How do we get the money redirected? Both of you.
Go ahead, Rodney.
Okay. Well, you know, I read a story in Dallas Magazine about how the city did not like to see this poor Black neighborhood, so they basically took the homes and plowed them down and built a parking lot.
Oh
Um,
man.
so and the parking lot is still there today, and this was in the '60s. So okay, so that's again to point out the institutional racism, and then you got banks, you got redlining, banks who won't loan to Black Americans in certain neighborhoods. So housing programs can be a big part of things that will help. Since housing is a huge part of wealth, any race, and if anything you can do to increase housing among Black Americans, and I think that's some sort of housing programs that will encourage Black home ownership, and that alone could improve generational wealth.
That's right. I agree. I agree. Um, See, they said the host has muted your mic. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Oh, there we are.
Okay.
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 Um,
I saw this on the screen. Go ahead, Ray.
yeah. So yeah, thank you. So homeownership has been a route to building wealth for nearly all Americans. Historically, it's been a little riskier in the last 20 years, of course. But and it is, if you look at the data, it is true that the net worth of blacks who own homes is much higher than the overall median net worth. So median net worth of blacks all together is 16,000, but if you could, but it jumps to 104 if you're a homeowner, and the gap between blacks and whites narrows too if you compare black and white homeowners. So I think there is good evidence here. Now, having said that, I think there's much more we can be doing. And one of the things I'll just mention to build off Rodney's really good list is the tax code. Right now the tax code is actually an engine of the racial wealth gap because it subsidizes wealthier people, the majority of whom are white. So I really like Dorothy Brown's proposal for a wealth tax credit that would be refundable, and that would benefit Black and other low wealth Americans.
I like that too. The tax code is built for people who own homes, not renters.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
and so we need to have some way to make that adjustment. Now everybody can't be homeowners, cannot become a homeowner, but we need to have some kind of break because right now, the rent is just being used to to increase the wealth of other people. You know, yes. Now, Ray, when we talk about financial literacy, what role can financial literacy play in addressing the racial and wealth gap?
Well, a very important role in Ted, and I think your work has demonstrated that, as has Rodney's. So I'm a huge fan of helping people make the best financial educational choices as possible. I'm a big fan of doing that early in life, so it becomes a habit. It's taught in
Mhm,
schools. It's why
mhm,
I'm a huge fan of things like baby bonds and Roths at birth, because if kids have their own money to manage, then they're going to, take that financial literacy course much more seriously.
mhm.
So I'm a huge fan, and I think we need to start it early. The only concern I have about financial literacy is that I don't want it to become an excuse for policymakers and banks to do more,
Mhm.
right? And so I think sometimes folks say, well, it's up to you to figure out this crazy, complicated financial system, and you're on your own. We're going to give you some financial literacy brochure, and we're done. No, I think you have to change. You have to have, not only do we want to encourage people to make better choices, we want to make sure they have better choices to make. And
That's true.
that's the role of governments, nonprofits, and banks, is to make institutional change so that people have better choices to make.
And
That's
can
right.
and can I add something to that,
Yes.
Ted? Okay, black folks have to have to talk finances with their children. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we it's almost like a taboo subject, right?
Hmm.
When it comes to black families, we have to have discussions around the dinner table about finances. So you don't have kids going off to college and not knowing how to open a checking account. And you know we have to it does work to share, not only how much you make. People don't want to talk about that with their children. They don't want their children to know. But I have, I've talked to actually a businesswoman in New York who said her mother basically made her write out the checks to pay the bills. So she never asked for anything because she knew there was never any money
Yes.
left over. So it's and then I know a part of that is the parents may not have the information or the knowledge about investing in stocks or so on. But your program, there are programs now at churches, community centers. So parents need to learn more about financial literacy, but they also need to talk to their children at the dinner table anytime.
And put it in practice. It reminded me when you talked about the couple who had the child to write the checks out. I had the same experience. And when I was in high school, I used to write all the checks out for my parents. My father was in the construction business, so he had me to handle the payroll. So I always had my hands on money and knew how to handle it. But yes, I used to write the utility bills, the Georgia Power Company, or wherever. So you're right. That having the knowledge, but having the practice, that knowledge is the practical application of it really helps out. And so what happens is when you do that kitchen table talk, or have the child have that exercise and writing checks out, it's transferable. So when I had my children, yes, they early on they had a checking account, so they know how to write their checks and how to maintain you know, their payments on time. So it carries over. So it's a multiplier effect. So I said, look, tell parents when I'm talking to them, just stop for a moment, teach them, show them. So because you're not raising your child today, you're raising your grandchildren, because it will be carried on. Yes. Now, and we, yeah, something else, Ron?
No, that was it.
Okay. One thing now, Ray joined me at an investor advisory committee meeting last September of 2020, and he just blew everybody away with his data he had about the um, the accumulation of financial assets. Showed that like 2.6 of us own financial assets. And we know that two ways, and we talked about one already, home ownership is a way to gain wealth. But the second one in America is financial assets. Um, so when we talk about financial assets, what can we do to make that more available to Black Americans and other minority groups, to get them engaged in opportunities to gain wealth, Ray?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Let me just start with the data so we know what the challenge ahead of us looks
Hmm.
like.
Hmm.
So, roughly 60% of white Americans have equities, exposure to equities in the stock market, with a median balance of $65,000.
Hmm.
Blacks, however, only about 32% are actually invested in the stock market, with a median value of only 16,000. So we've got some pretty big gaps to
Hmm.
overcome here. So but yes, I think this is critical in many ways. Historically, at least, the stock market has generated bigger returns than home ownership, right?
Hmm.
Yet the popular narrative is just get a home and you're going to build wealth. Well, yes, you should get a home
Hmm.
under the right terms, supported by the tax code in the right way, all that. But you can't just stop there. And one of the reasons the wealth gap has increased, the racial wealth gap is increasing so much, is because so much stock ownership is at the top and it's held by whites. So you don't see black wealth moving very much, but you see the gap, getting a lot wider because the stock market is doing so much better. So I think the challenge is to get more Americans into the stock market so they can reap those benefits. And again, I just come back to, boy, just seed it with every generation, so that they become investors from day one. And then, I think auto 401ks, I mean, we should just be doing that for everybody and get them into some kind of a target fund just to get them some exposure.
That's right.
There's other ways to do it too. Of course, I hope it's taught in schools, in financial literacy courses.
Hmm.
I like what John Rogers is doing with his Ariel Academy. The kids are given 20 grand, as I forget what grade it starts, but then they get to invest that money, and then whatever profit they make goes into their 529 account, and then they take the principal and they give it back to the next set of kids.
Hmm.
So I think things like that are really very powerful, and we need to be doing more of it.
Hmm. That's good. We have a student ambassadors program on the campuses of historically Black colleges and universities. And one of the activities that the student ambassadors become engaged in is the stock market challenge, where they compete against each other, you know. But it's a learning exercise primarily, where we give them virtual money and they get excited, about who's going to win, who we get first, second, and third place. So they get bragging rights too, and plus they get a chance to learn. We're hoping that is comes into creates a multiplier effect. They share that with their parents and friends, and that's happened. We get calls from parents and they say, look, our kids learned a lot, and they've shared it with the parents, and we ask them to do that. So that's a great deal. Now, Ray's report, Rodney, he also talked about, and I think we mentioned before, those company sponsored 401k plans. Is there any way to um, get the mindset change in the Black community to get them to contribute more? You have some people say, well, I need all of my money, I can't just afford to. Now we show them examples of why you need to take or set aside $50 from your paycheck every month, every $100, and the consequences of not doing that. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, historically, Black Americans are very conservative investors. Even even in the 401ks. So I think part of that is showing the difference, that $100 invested in equities as opposed to, I don't want to say passbook accounts, but those accounts that are paying like 2-3% now. It's safe, but if you don't have a lot of money, then you're not willing to speculate. I don't want to say speculate. That's too strong a word. Okay,
Yeah.
but you're not willing to take risks with what little money that you have. So again, we can come back to financial literacy and the importance of having a financial advisor, a certified financial advisor, and I think part of that lesson is that you don't have to be a millionaire to have a financial advisor.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of financial advisors who do basically pro bono work at churches, community centers. It's just a matter of finding some help and educating yourself. I think the automatic enrollment of 401ks is a big part of getting people to invest. I mean, the numbers show the dramatic increase in participation in company plans with that once that's implemented. But I think part of it, you have to reach. I think you have to reach certain segments of the population with programs that are and policies that are offered by the state and federal government. And we could talk about these state savings plans, like the one in Illinois, there's one in Massachusetts. But states were basically approving these plans that would provide a retirement plan for people who did not have access to 401ks and pensions. And I think that could be a big help.
I agree. I think those state plans be very helpful. We got to find a way because you're going to get in a situation where we said earlier about Social Security, where the average Social Security benefit is only $1,700 a month. Your maximum is going to be 2,000, and most of us can't live in a small town, you know, with that kind of income. So we got to look at other ways to do that. And I just get excited about the states getting engaged too, because at the end of the day if this does not happen where individuals do not create wealth and have sufficient income when they grow older, it becomes a burden on the state. So it's for all our interests, to do something about this, to do something about this subject. Now both of you have written books on this subject. Ray, you have a book coming out. Um, it came out. It just came out. It's going to be exciting. Let's talk to us about your book.
It's right
Because
here.
yes, okay, it's the future of building wealth. Let's talk about the future of building wealth. And so share your thoughts. There with the audience.
Thank you, Ted. Yeah, it came out at the end of September. It was my pandemic project. I was stuck at home. I wasn't traveling, and I knew a lot of authors might be as well. So yeah, I think the reason for the book was okay. COVID and the recession clearly were going to be threats to family finances. But we also have to see threats as opportunities to rethink how we do things,
Mhm.
right? Not just keep doing what we've been doing for years. And so my thought was, what if I commissioned some thinkers across the country to contribute a chapter, like an op-ed you'd see in the New York Times
Mhm.
about, ways to build wealth. So the book really, it does a couple of things. I think one, it says, what's our latest and absolute best thinking on shoring up balance sheets, savings, reducing debts, home ownership, college, retirement, small business. We have a lot of essays just about that. All right. The promise of fintech, all those things. But then a whole nother section of the book, it says, can we reimagine how families generate an ownership stake in America from the beginning. And I think here's where we're trying to say, okay, it's really hard for people to take their labor market income and try to squeeze out enough savings to build sufficient wealth. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, can't max out your 401k, it's really hard to save enough money to build sufficient wealth. So we thought, could there be other ways to generate an ownership stake? So we have essays saying, well, what about your data, your private data that we all give up, right, to these companies that are making a fortune off of our data? Well, what if we thought about our data as a collective asset, that we all own, and we aggregate it and we get dividends from its use, right? So there's an idea. There's also a novel idea that a company, Abbott, is pioneering, where if a student makes if a young worker makes a student loan payment, they automatically earn a contribution to the retirement account. So we're trying to break down silos. And then just the final idea I'll mention is, what if the government were to get actively involved in the stock market, like a sovereign wealth fund, and say, when the stock market is down, the government buys up all these shares, holds on to them until the market appreciates, sells the shares, and then uses the proceeds to give a wealth dividend to all low wealth Americans. So, I just want to underscore that there's all kinds of innovative things going on out there, and we wanted to bring them together into one book, so that as policymakers, foundations, and others sort of think about how do we build wealth in the future, there's some ideas for them to look at.
Oh, that's great. Now, Rodney, your book is titled "Fixing the Wealth Gap." Give us a key point that you raised in your book.
Okay, and my book is just out. my book is just out in the last couple of weeks. We just had a book launch, but the point is, first I talk about some of the historical reasons why we're here, but then if you look at it, there are some differences between basically financial planning for African Americans versus white Americans. We have some very different and unique issues, and as you know, as African Americans looking for a African American financial planner, there are not very many CFS certified financial planners who are African American out there, and a big part of that is feeling comfortable with talking to these people. But we have issues unique, like Ray was talking about student loan debt. Black students are graduating with considerably more student loan debt than white students, and then they default. As a result of that, they default at a higher rate. Okay, and within 4 years of graduation, you can look at credit. Black Americans have worse credit scores, and there are historical reasons for that as well. But when it comes to buying a house or buying a car or even getting a credit card, okay, you're paying. Okay, I have in my book that basically the difference between financing a car with a 2% interest rate versus a 10 or 12%, and that payment is huge. So, so part of it is teaching about the and I don't know if people really understand what goes into a credit score and how that can be with you for the rest of your life when you have bad credit. And it's not just traced back to low wage earners, but there are some things you can do to improve credit, and there are things you can do to, and you're a big proponent of keeping down the debt.
Yes.
Black Americans consumers have more debt overall, not just the college students, which also contributes to a lower credit score. So, so once I talk about the history, then I talk about the importance of doing things, and especially the importance of getting a financial planner involved, in your finances, and sitting down, not just a man or a woman, but the whole family, so they can all understand financial planning and the importance. And once you do that, then you learn the importance of investing in stocks versus versus these low interest rate bearing accounts.
That's right. Yes, you're right. We talk about that. We talk about credit, the heavy debt load that exists, and how to manage your credit score, because we know that higher credit scores, um, will cause you to have a high interest rate on your loan or any other type of loan that you have, which thus is a drainage on your financial resources, and it can limit your ability to even contribute to your 401k, because your monthly payment for on your car is very high. So we put a lot of emphasis on that, on making sure you understand how to manage your credit score, and how the impact of that, not managing well, the impact of that on your overall financial well-being, and the drainage of financial resources that you have. Now, any closing comments here, Ray? Big picture items that you think we want the audience to take away?
Wow. Okay. Yeah. My goodness. Uh, I encourage all the listeners to experiment, to try things, to do things. And I just want to underscore a point that Rodney made. You can't build wealth without taking some risks, but you can take reasonable risks to do that. And so
Yes.
wealth building is about risk management. And I would encourage folks to think a little bit more about the kinds of risks they're willing to take, in order to build wealth.
Yes. Rodney?
Some big picture policy changes. Ray has talked about baby bonds. Senator Booker has introduced legislation to do that. But there's also things like reparations. I think we were more, we were more, we were more hopeful, I think, during the whole Black Lives Matter protest. But reparations and baby bonds were greatly reduced the racial wealth gap and almost eliminated it. And go ahead, Ray.
Oh, no, I didn't want to cut you off. I just wanted to
Okay.
add something when you were done.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm done.
Well, I just want to go back to the data. We ran the numbers at the Fed, and you have this 10-to-1 wealth gap, but it only shrinks to 8-to-1 if you sort of account for choices that people make, which means that 80% of the wealth gap is embedded, right? It won't go away no matter what we do, no matter how good we are, how financial literate we are. So I think Rodney's right. We have to look back and think about some sort of redress for past, sins. Really, we have to look at what's in front of us, like student loans and the tax code. But then we have to look forward, things like baby bonds. And it's only by doing all three of those things that we can really make progress on the racial wealth gap.
That's right. We had a great discussion yesterday regarding the 529 plan, going forward to accumulate money for college costs. That would eliminate the high student loan debt that a lot of Black college graduates have. Parents start thinking early, as soon as the kid is born, to get a social security number, $50 a month, $50 a month, 25, whatever, so when you get to that point of graduation, going to college, you go away to college with tax-free money, and that debt load coming out of college is much less than it would be otherwise, right? So it's good. So I really appreciate you this morning. I enjoyed the conversation, and I wish you great success with your books, and I'm going to read both of them, because I'm always out there trying to get more knowledge, and to share with our targeted audiences, and to help them enhance their financial well-being, and create wealth, because I want the economy to be more efficient, and the only way to do that, in my mind, is increase their financial literacy, and also show them the practical application of what they're learning. So we can get the most out of all the resources, financial resources that we have. So have a great day. And I'm sure, as we're friends, we'll be talking soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Great to share a
Yes.
stage with you, Rodney. Best of luck.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we will move on to our workshops for the day. We have some outstanding workshops coming up. The first one coming up that deals with financial well-being toolkit and financial empathy. We'll have that session going on, and we also talk about financial strategies and resources during the COVID-19 pandemic. So those are the first two workshops we have this morning. So we will get started.